Last week in this House, we learned that government had provided a gift of $4.7 million through the Potato Board to Cavendish Farms. A question to the Minister of Agriculture and Lands. How did you arrive at this amount, and what was this amount based on?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amount was, but the Potato Board did all the work on this, and they supplied all the estimates and the report to us. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Typically, when an agreement is struck, there is planning that involves determining and documenting a list of specific goals, deliverables, features, functions, tasks, deadlines, and ultimately costs. In other words, it describes what needs to be achieved and the work that must be done. To the same Minister, what are the terms of the agreement with the Potato Board, and will the Minister immediately table the agreement in the House?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I will table it. Nothing to hide here, Mr. Speaker. And the agreement basically was that Prince Edward Island potatoes all were processed. That is the agreement, and that is the agreement that's going forward, and that's what's happening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the same Minister, what are the conditions of the agreement, and what is required of the Potato Board in overseeing this agreement?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
They oversee, thank you, Mr. Speaker. They oversee the process to ensure that all the potatoes are processed and that all the receipts are gathered through the Potato Board, Mr. Speaker. It's very upfront. It's very transparent. We're just making sure good food gets processed. We're making sure there's not an environmental problem. We're making sure there's not a plant health problem, Mr. Speaker. And thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the crops have been planted. They're doing well. Things are happening in agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the questions that I'm asking are about accountability, because I've gone through some of the finance agreements and lending agreements, and there's a very substantial application process that businesses, for instance, had to go through. Like, one of them would be 4 pages long. And there is a list of requirements, so financial statements from the previous year, interim financial statements of the current year. And so it's just usually there's a long list and a proposal that is provided. And as I stated, you would come up with that agreement and have measurable data to know that the money that was spent is spent in the right way, and it's all about accountability. So, question to the same Minister. How will we know if the Potato Board was successful in making good use of the $4.7 million?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're in constant communication with the Potato Board. They are monitoring this very closely, Mr. Speaker. And the potatoes are getting bought, they're getting paid for, Mr. Speaker, they're getting processed. Farmers are doing good. I don't know why I have to defend the potato industry. We have $500 million in a COVID pandemic, $500 million in an industry that is going to lead this province, lead us out of this pandemic, Mr. Speaker. I am fully supportive of the potato industry, and I will fully support this deal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not asking for you to defend potato farmers, nor am I asking you to defend the spend. What I'm asking is for accountability on the spend, which is very different. So, for instance, I looked up the Community Catalyst Grant, which is up to $1,000 and goes out to a community. And when they spend that money, they have to report back on, with a final report on how they spent that $1,000. So when we're talking about $4.7 million, there needs to be additional accountability. And so that's what I'm questioning here. I'm questioning the accountability. And so my final question to the same minister, how do you expect to report back to the legislature on how the money was spent and whether it met its objectives?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, we're working with the potato board on this. They're keeping a track of everything. So I will present anything that the member across would like. It's very transparent. And we're supporting an industry that needed us at that time, Mr. Speaker, and I will do it again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Winslow.